All right, and I think we're live. Hey everyone, can you hear me okay? I don't do this live very often, so hopefully everything is working all right. Let me know in the chat if you can hear me okay, if you can see me okay, and we will get started in just a few minutes. We'll let people join and give ourselves some time to figure out any tech. Grab yourself a some water or some tea or whatever. We're going to be together for the next hour and a bit. Awesome. Thanks to everyone who's joined in so far. Just having a look to see that the stream is nice and healthy. Yeah, Blair Puppy, I mean, there is a chance that this is pre-recorded, but there's also a chance it's not. I guess you'll never know. Okay. Looks like everything is working nice and stable. Hey, Khalil. All right, nice. We'll get started in maybe one more minute. I can see that there are still people jumping in. I want to make sure that everyone's had time to settle in. And we're going to get started on our topic for the day. And I've got to make sure to look at the camera rather than looking at the chat. So chat is over here. If you see me looking over this side, that's me reading your comments. While we're waiting, let me know what time it is for you right now. For me, it is 12 p.m. here in New Zealand. Yeah, the thing is, Denkatsu, what's possible is that I predicted all the questions that would be asked, and then I pre-scripted all the answers. So this still could be pre-recorded. 6 a.m., 1 a.m. Thank you for those who are up really late or got up really early just to watch this. Really appreciate it. I will try to make the most of your time. Nice. Got a good international spread. Alrighties. I think we'll get started now. People should be pretty settled in. So the topic of today, and I do want this to be interactive. So as I'm teaching stuff, feel free to ask your questions in the chat. I've also got people in the team monitoring the chat, so they will also help to surface those key questions that come up. And then after I do my little segment at the beginning, going through what I think is sort of the most important ways to think about learning faster and the simplest methods, and I'll give you two methods. I'll then go and pick some of those key questions and we'll do some sort of open Q&A. So the initial teaching part will probably only be like about 20-25 minutes, and the rest of it is going to be really interactive. So that's the schedule and the outline for the day. Sounding okay to you guys? Hopefully that's okay. So what we're talking about today is the simplest ways of learning faster. And I'm going to give you two methods to anchor onto. And I call these as two simplest methods because there are many ways to learn faster. And there are lots of different learning strategies and lots of different learning techniques. And some of these techniques are very difficult to learn. Yes, it's very fast, but it takes a long time to get good enough to use it. Some of these techniques are so easy that you almost can't get it wrong and you can pick it up pretty much instantly, and it gives you an immediate benefit. These are two of what I think are my favorites. Before I get into that though, there are two ways of thinking about learning faster. One of them is much more common, and this is really, if you're thinking about learning faster in this way, it's going to make it much harder for you to improve. And the other way is the more correct way. And so that's the first thing that I want to get into, and then I'll go through the actual methods. So let's say that you are here. This is your current level of ability. And you're trying to get to this point here where you are able to learn faster. As I said, I'll give you two methods on how to do this in a bit. But what's important is to understand that most people waste most of their time here. They don't actually get to the point where they are using the techniques to help you learn faster. The techniques exist. The techniques are not hard to use. Most people never get around to actually using these techniques. They waste most of their time just trying to find the right technique. And the reason they're not able to find it is because their criteria for what is a good technique for learning faster is incorrect. When I say the word faster, there are a couple ways that you could interpret this word. The first way that you could interpret this word faster, okay, so what does the word faster really mean? The first way you could interpret this is purely speed. This is how much material can I cover in a certain amount of time. If you have a technique that allows you to cover a lot of material in a very short amount of time, most people would say that's a fast learning method. That's the one that you want to learn. Whereas if I said, hey, it's going to take you twice as long to cover this material in the same amount of time, would you want to learn that one instead? And most people intuitively, and I know that those of you that are watching this stream, especially if you've like tuned in at 5 a.m. to watch a stream about learning to learn, maybe you're not most people, but most people off the bat intuitively, they're not going to want to use that technique that takes twice as long to cover the material. Makes sense, right? Some of you will know where I'm going with this, which is that there is another way of thinking about speed, which I like to call time to outcome. Time to outcome is vastly superior in terms of the speed that really matters for you, the real outcome that you're trying to achieve. So here's the difference. Let's say that you have a certain volume of material that you need to cover. That is this yellow box. This is the total volume that you need to learn. So when you measure based on speed and your metric is how much can you cover, then what you're looking at is when I sit down to cover this volume of material, how long does that take? If this is fast, then we call this a fast technique. However, just because you've covered it doesn't mean that you've reached the outcome that you need to reach. So if you are studying for an exam, which is, just the most easy frame for why you might be learning something, it doesn't mean that just because you've covered it, you're actually going to do well on the exam, right? Because obviously on top of this, there is this need for rehearsal. Rehearsal is you going over that material over and over again. It's you relearning the things that you forgot. It's finding the gaps. It's realizing that you didn't quite understand something in the right way and reaching a higher level of mastery. It's testing yourself and realizing that you're not thinking about it deeply enough. You don't know how two things relate to each other in the way that it needs to. Those of you that are learning not for an exam, but for the workplace, to upskill for your careers, tackling a new project, a new set of responsibilities. This is primarily the gap that you're trying to reach. Covering the material is really just the very, very, very first out of 100 steps. And so most of the time, that really matters is sunk in this part here, the rehearsal. And this is where time to outcome makes a difference. Time to outcome says, what is the total amount of time that you need to spend in order to reach the outcome that you need to reach? Whether that's an exam or upskilling for work or whatever it is. Whereas speed, often people think about it just per session, how much you cover. And the reason this is important is because most of the methods that allow you to reach the outcome in a shorter period of time have a slower coverage speed. So you're covering material a little bit slower, but you're saving time overall by needing less of this rehearsal, and you're doing less repeating. You're able to reach higher levels of understanding more quickly. Does that make sense to you guys? First, this is super important because I can teach you the technique and I can teach you what the right method is, and most people just want to know what's a method that's going to allow me to cover 100 pages as quickly as possible. And if that's the way you're thinking about it, I may as well not teach you at all, because those methods are not really going to move the needle for you. Are we following along so far? Okay. I'll give you a quick I guess like a little mini story to tie this in. I remember, in fact, this is actually quite a common story, but I remember coaching one of my students who's a doctor actually. They're studying for their specialist training exams. And I've been working with her for a few months at that point, and we've been working through these different strategies. And one week she comes on to this call and says, Justin, I'm really concerned. Like, I'm really worried. I'm starting to get real stressed and anxious about my exams coming up because, oh, sorry, I'll switch back to my main camera. I'm getting really worried because it's taking me twice as long to cover it. Like, my schedule says that I'm meant to have covered all of this stuff by last week, but right now, like, I'm only halfway through it. I'm really worried about it. So I said, okay, that sounds concerning. Let's break it down. What's your level of retention? What's the level of mastery that you're reaching? And she said, okay, well, I've spent 10 hours studying this. My retention at the moment is pretty good. It's like 80%. And the mastery of it is really high, but it's just so slow. So I said, okay, let's compare this to before. Maybe there are things that you were doing before that we can bring back into your system to increase that speed a little bit, because we do want to make sure we're covering everything in time. So we looked at her baseline, and she was like, oh, my baseline was that I'd normally have around 80 to 90% retention as well, but the mastery was much lower. So there was 80 to 90% retention, but really just about fact recall. And when it came to really the more complicated problems and the more complicated cases she was meant to be able to work through, she said that she was never really able to do that. She would spend weeks trying to figure that out and wrap her head around it, talking to her seniors and supervisors to figure that out. And I said, so right now, do you feel that your ability to do that is better than it was before? And she was like, yes. Like, I've literally never felt that I was able to think at that level before. So this is the situation where you really have to be comparing apples with apples. If you're comparing a technique that was really fast, giving you good retention, but that retention is only at the low level, and it's taking you essentially like an infinite amount of time, no matter how long you spend, you're still not able to reach that top level, then that is a method that is just not effective. It doesn't actually matter how fast you're going, because it's not even getting you the result that you need. The first thing is to use a method that gets you the result that you need, and then find a way to make that faster. And this is what I communicated to her. She was like, yes, understand that. We worked on speeding that up. Eventually the efficiency did come as she just got used to that process a bit more. It was still not as fast in terms of just covering the material, but it allowed her to achieve the level she needed to, the depth she needed to, with the retention she needed, and saving that time. And the later half of the schedule was just on revision and testing. And we didn't need half of that time anymore because we just simply were forgetting less and there were less gaps to cover, right? So that's the goal. That's the goal that you guys should have. If that's not the goal, I think it's going to be really difficult to really improve your learning speed. Okay, so let's move on to the two key methods. We're following along so far? Okay, so the first method is just to increase your frequency of prediction errors. When I say the word, oh, sorry, I didn't. There you go. Increase your frequency of prediction errors. When I say increase frequency of prediction errors, how much sense does this make to you? Because I've talked about this a little bit in some other videos, but you may not have seen those. So out of 10, 10 out of 10 means you completely understand this. It makes total sense to you. Like you already know exactly what I'm going to talk about here. 1 out of 10 is like, I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. You need to break it down for me step by step. Where are we sitting right now? Let me know in the chat. Okay, we got a range. If this is already familiar to you, bear with me, please. But I want to make sure that we're on the same page because this is super, super important. And like I said, it's such a simple method. Literally anyone can do this. And it's just so easy compared to the benefit that it gives you. A prediction error is basically a signal that tells your brain that you need to learn it in a different way, in a better way, in a more accurate way. And the prediction error, that signal drives deeper understanding and it strengthens your memory. A prediction error occurs very simply when you, number one, make a prediction about something, and number two, you realize you were wrong. That's it. So let's say that I am opening up and reading through a book. The first thing that I will normally do is scan through, look at some of the keywords and the headings. I now have a basic understanding about the main ideas that are going to be communicated in this book chapter or the next few pages. I don't have a deep understanding. I don't really know what the main points are going to be, but I at least have an understanding about what the terminology is, what the keywords are. If there are learning objectives, I'll read through the learning objectives and I'll have a better idea about maybe the direction that we're going to take. At that point, I will pause. I will not just start reading. I will pause and I will take those lists of words or those learning objectives and I will make predictions. I will ask myself, what do I predict the points are going to be about? What do I think it's going to teach me? Even if I have absolutely no idea what these words are or what they mean. Even if the terminology is completely foreign, you can always make a guess. I sometimes like to think about it like a game show. Imagine you're on this game show, you could win $1 million, but you have to try and guess what this point is going to be. And you know it's something that you have no idea about, but you want this $1 million, so you're still going to do your best. You're going to logic it out. You're going to use first principles. You're going to dissect the word and be like, well, okay, I mean, the first part of this word is like demi, and I know what the word demi means. The second part of the word I've never seen before, but it looks kind of French, reminds me of this other word. I wonder if it's related to that. It could be as abstract as you want it to be, but you're going to do your best to predict what the body of information is. That's all you do. And then you go and just read it, and then you learn about it. And most likely, most of your predictions will be wrong. And therefore, you have created a prediction error. It's just the easiest thing to do. Just predict, be wrong. Automatically, by virtue of you having tried your best to predict it and being wrong, that signal goes back to your brain and it reinforces that memory. And in terms of why this happens, that gets a little bit complicated. But a lot of the benefit comes down to the way you do the prediction. So you do have to try your best to make the prediction as best as you can. Don't randomly make a prediction that you don't even think is like remotely close to being right. You do want to think about being logical, trying your best to work through the ideas, drawing on whatever knowledge you have. This process forces you to draw on existing connections. It forms a network with this knowledge. And then that becomes the base template that your brain then can build on as accurate information arrives. So when that prediction error happens, that schema of understanding gets better and better and better. So that is a prediction error. And you can do this at every level of learning. You can do this before you've even started the first paragraph of a new book. You can do this before you've even started watching a video. At any point, you can do this 2 hours into a particular concept, and there's just one paragraph that goes into a very technical process. You can do that then too. You can make a little mini prediction. So this process of learning, you want to get into this habit of making a prediction, being wrong, realizing what the right answer is, and then making your next round of predictions. And that next round is usually more detailed and more nuanced because you're working through the material. That's what it means to make prediction errors, and you want to do this as frequently as possible. How are we feeling about this strategy so far? Pretty simple, right? Making sense? Any questions about this first method? Just reading through the chat, by the way. Okay. We'll have time for other Q&A later as well if you think of more questions. The second method ties in really well with the idea of making prediction errors. And this is multi-pass encoding. It sounds very fancy, but it is also extremely easy. Multi-pass encoding just means don't try and learn or even understand everything the first time you go through a passage of text or a video or any kind of material. Instead, go through and only spend time and attention on the things that feel easy enough to understand. This method is extremely easy because it's literally defined by what you find easy. Here's what's happening inside your brain. Your brain, okay, your brain has an existing set of networks. This network is essentially your existing knowledge. One of the most influential predictors of how quickly someone is able to learn something, how easily they can learn it, how long they will remember and retain something for, is how much prior knowledge they already have about it. So there's this quite famous study that was done looking at baseball. They got a group of, I think that was students, they got a group of students. Some of these students knew a lot about baseball, and some of them didn't know anything about baseball. They then assessed their reading ability, and they divided the students into those with high reading ability versus those with low reading ability. So high reading ability means that you can normally read faster, maybe your comprehension is better when you're reading, you have more active reading skills. They gave a passage about baseball to these students. And what they found was that students who already knew about baseball had the highest level of performance of all. So what this means is you could have knowledge about baseball and have a low reading ability, and you will still outperform the person with high reading ability but no knowledge of baseball. So compared to reading ability, knowledge about baseball was more important. And the story here is that prior knowledge is an incredibly powerful point of leverage. The thing is that most people don't think about prior knowledge as something that they can control. Prior knowledge is in your control. Prior knowledge is not like experience in a CV. You know those memes where it's like, looking for entry level role, new graduate, must have 35 years of experience and 7 degrees, you know? That's not what prior knowledge is about. Prior knowledge can be built on. You just have to choose to build on it. So because we all have some body of existing knowledge, that means that there are certain things that are easier to connect to, that we recognize a little bit easier than other pieces of information. There could be some kind of concept that you've never heard of before. You have absolutely no idea what it is. You haven't even heard of anything remotely similar to this. So that's going to be way out here. That's going to be really hard for you to connect to. So don't connect to it. Skim through and find the parts that are easier to understand, the things that are closer to your existing body of knowledge. And what will naturally happen is that eventually your knowledge expands. You now have more prior knowledge than you did before. That's your first pass. Your second pass, you just go through it again. And now the things that didn't make sense for you were really complicated, very technical, very overwhelming. Now you understand what it's talking about. It's easier to think of. In fact, you may even be curious about what it's talking about because you have more prior knowledge. And so this thing that was previously out of reach, eventually maybe on the second or third pass, becomes just as easy to understand as the first pass. Every step on a staircase is the same distance from the previous step. If you try to jump to the second story in one go, that's going to be very difficult. That's going to be very overwhelming to try and do. But as long as you're looking for the next step, you will eventually just get to that. And it will be no more difficult than the first thing. This is multi-pass encoding. It's actually deliberately ignoring information that doesn't make sense to you. When you go through for the first time something that's very technical and very detailed, most of the information you will skip because you just don't have enough prior knowledge to make sense of it easily. And that's totally fine. On your first pass, 80-90% is you're skimming through it and you're kind of glazing over mentally. You're like, I just do not understand how to fit this together. And you're just going to find little pockets here and there of stuff that feels a little bit easier. You're willing to spend a little bit of time wrapping your head around it. Go back to the beginning. Now maybe an additional 10 or 20% starts becoming relevant. Then go back to the beginning and you will find that suddenly a lot of stuff feels relevant. Because just having a little bit of prior knowledge, those key anchor points, gives you so many more possible ways to connect that new information that it becomes exponentially easier. So you don't have to do like 7 or 8 passes to cover the material. And the great thing about this method actually is that it's actually potentially faster, or at least just as fast as the normal speed it would have taken you. Because even though you're doing it 2 or 3 times, going over the material, the time you're spending on each pass is much shorter. Whereas in the normal way where you kind of just start at the beginning and you just slog your way through to the end, because you don't understand it, you're reading that paragraph again and again and again, and you're reading it very slowly and you're trying to figure it out. And then you do that, and then by the end of it, you still don't remember it. You still didn't understand it because it's just too much. It's just overwhelming. So your speed when you're trying to understand everything all at once in linear order is very slow, and it's just very ineffective. Your speed when you do multipass is much faster, and it's more effective. So that's multipass encoding. Does that make sense? You can see how it fits into the prediction era really well, because you just read a little bit, you make a prediction about it, then you learn whether you are right or wrong, then you find the next part that's sort of relevant. So every pass you're going through, you're making tiny little prediction errors along the way. How are we finding it so far? We following the methods pretty well? Is it making sense? If there's something that you're not sure about, let me know, leave a question. All right, so it's been about half an hour now. These are the two main methods that I wanted us to cover over. I can also see that there are a variety of different questions that people have asked. So I'm gonna jump in and go through some of those key questions, and we'll open up a little bit more for that Q&A. I'm leaving it at just these two because frankly, these two methods are they're enough to really tangibly change your efficiency of learning, and you can apply that straight away. When I'm reading a book, I don't have, let's say, my iPad with me. I don't have a piece of paper with me. Let's say I'm on a plane, I'm in a car, I'm just reading something before I go to sleep. I want to be able to learn and extract as much as I can, as efficiently as I can, without having to sit there at a desk and really study it out. So in terms of bread and butter techniques that I use consistently every day, every week, this is, I would say, 70% of my toolkit. This is mostly what I'm doing mentally to make the most out of my time when I'm learning something. And it's over the years become effective enough that I've stopped doing other things. It's just become unnecessary. And it's allowed me to have a really slim, flexible way of learning material where I know that I can pretty much learn anything pretty fast just by using these two methods alone. So I don't want to overwhelm you with too many other things. Obviously, I have hundreds of other videos where I talk about other strategies which you can layer onto this. But if you take nothing else away, I'll just say focus on these two strategies first and get good at this. Okay. Cool. So I'm now going to jump into a few other questions that people have asked. Feel free to ask any other questions about what I've covered here, and I can come back to it later. So there's a question here that says, Justin, how would you approach learning an entire textbook? I tend to go too deep into every topic, waste time on the details, and then later forget them. What you have to understand about learning a super high volume of material is that the least important thing is consuming the information. The most important thing is what you do before and after consuming the information. That's where you need to have the focus. Before consuming the information, you need to be in the mental state where you are ready to receive that information. An analogy I always give is if I throw a ball at someone and ambush them, they're not likely to be able to catch that ball. If I give them a warning, I give them a heads up, I say, hey, I'm about to throw this ball at you and it's gonna land roughly here, you can be prepared. Same thing for your brain. Don't ambush your brain with random information and expect it to just hold on to it. You need to prep the brain. You need to prime the brain. You need to give it a reason to care about this thing that you're about to learn. And the order is important. I say this has to happen before you consume the information because your working memory is very small. So Working memory is where new information comes in, and inside your working memory, this is where you make sense of it. If you process and make sense of this information really well inside this working memory, it's going to be converted into long-term memory. If you do it really well, this long-term memory is going to be very durable. It will last for a very long time, which means you're going to forget it more slowly. If you don't do much inside this working memory, and you just kind of passively read over it, or you're just trying to understand it, or you're repeating it to yourself multiple times, that's all you're doing, then that is not very strong. That's not going to stay in your long-term memory for very long. You're going to forget it very quickly, right? So this goes into the bin. The working memory is short. It only lasts roughly 15 seconds. And you can only hold on to roughly 4 or so items at a time. So let's say that you're reading something and your approach is, I'm going to read this chapter. I'm going to read these 3 or 4 pages, and then I'm going to make sense of it. I'm going to write all these notes first, I'm going to read through it, and then I'm going to go through, make sense of it, maybe connect it, organize the information. That strategy does not work, because by the time you're finished the second paragraph, the stuff that you covered in the first paragraph is already being lost. The working memory cannot support 3 pages and 20 minutes of reading. It can't hold on to things that long. So it's just a waste of time. You have to do it beforehand so that when it comes into your working memory, your brain already knows what to do with it. It's prepared and it's able to sort it and shunt that information through into your long-term memory in a more effective way. And then you can always go back and then strengthen it even further. But going through covering a bunch of material first and then assuming you can come back to it later, that's going to lead to a lot of wasted time. And this is the classic thing where you read through stuff, you write a bunch of notes on it, you spend like hours studying it, you come to it a week later and it's like, you may as well have not studied it at all. It's just like someone else's notes. You have the memory of writing these notes, but none of the actual material is in your brain. That was a waste of time. You don't need to do that. So the most important thing is to make sure that your brain is ready. How do you make sure that your brain is ready? One of the ways that you can do that, one of the simplest ways that you can do that, is creating prediction errors. Make more predictions and be wrong about your predictions more often. Before you consume those pages, guess what the points are going to be. Do your best to understand the material without even knowing what the material is going to be about. Have those predictions, learn about them, be wrong, have that light bulb moment where you realize you were wrong. You're creating the aha moments for yourself. And by doing that, naturally what will happen is you will find that you don't end up going unnecessarily deep on a topic because you're framing your brain in terms of what's relevant. You're giving your brain clearer parameters. You will not be wasting as much time, and the retention on the stuff that you cover is going to be deeper, naturally, unavoidably, actually. Okay, so that's that question. Next question. Oh, this is a good question here. I feel like some of my learning and studying habits may actually be slowing me down. What should I stop doing if I want to learn faster? I love this question. I love this question because this person clearly has an understanding that some habits that we have around learning used to serve us when we first developed that strategy, but may no longer be serving us now. That's a really mature perspective. The idea that we have to update our learning habits. So I really like that. In my experience, I think that the habit that there, okay, there are two answers, I believe. The first thing is a habit that stops you from improving. You cannot go from being slow at learning to being fast at learning overnight. There is a transition period. There is a transformation that has to take place. You can't go from being unfit to running a marathon overnight. Similarly, your brain needs time to adapt. Most people are very capable of transforming the way that they learn. Most people do not undergo that transformation because they don't understand what good actually looks like. And the most common way that people misunderstand what good looks like is through measuring the speed of their learning. This is what we talked about before, right? It's assuming that just because I cover material very quickly, that means that I'm faster and that I'm a better learner. It's not understanding the amount of time you sink into relearning what you've forgotten and reaching that higher level of depth and mastery. It's not understanding that effective learning is more important than efficient learning at first. You need a method that gets you the outcome you need first. And it's the unwillingness, the habit of holding on to a learning method and holding on to it very preciously and tightly and being unwilling to change it that stops people from improving in the first place. That, in my experience as a coach, is one of the most common things that stops people from improving, even if the method is there. Even if I teach them the right method to use, they don't learn or internalize or commit to that method because they're afraid of letting go of the method that they already have, even though they know that it's not serving them. And often it's because they don't realize that they're measuring speed rather than time to outcome, how long it takes to get to that outcome. The other thing, and this is more like a direct technical process thing, is, and I don't know if this person is doing this, really common bad habit that people have around learning that slows them down like crazy is just writing notes for the sake of writing notes. I think that a lot of us were conditioned in school to believe that you're not learning if you're not writing it down, or that writing is learning. It's a really popular myth. The act of writing things down does not automatically produce effective learning. And certainly not learning that actually matters for most performance outcomes. I mean, you can look at studies where it's like, hey, here's a passage of text or a list of words. We'll get one group of people to just read them and one group of people to write them out, and then we'll measure their retention like an hour later. Yeah, the people that write them down will have better retention, but that's generally not the performance standard that we really care about. It needs to be a lot longer than an hour, and it needs to be much more mastery than just reciting a list of words. When it comes to understanding concepts, being able to apply concepts, holding on to the meaning of those concepts for weeks or months or even years, the stuff that really makes a difference is in how you think about it, how you process that information. Writing does not automatically activate really like any of those processes. And so we have to let go of that sense of security around writing notes and feeling like we have to write the notes. And I would actually say that for a lot of people, just deliberately choosing to write fewer notes and writing down less words, that will lead to an improvement in your ability to learn because it forces you to spend more time just thinking about it and being really selective about what you choose to write. So here's a litmus test for you. If you get to the end of a week and you look at all the time you spent on learning or studying, how much of that time is spent on writing notes? If you finish writing notes, how well would you perform with that knowledge? If you sat an exam on it, what score would you get? If you do not feel that after spending that time, you would do pretty well, you have to ask yourself, is there a better way of spending that time? And the answer is yes. So I think that, especially if you, a lot of you guys will still be in school or in university, try to throw away that habit that maybe your teachers gave you in the past of just like, you have to write. You don't have to be writing down everything. Okay. This is another good question here. In a fast, content-heavy lecture, what does higher order note-taking actually look like in real time when you can't pause to synthesize or compare ideas? When you're first learning how to do higher order learning, comparing things, synthesizing things, it is much easier to learn this on written text. I would recommend that if you're just trying to learn the skill, practice with reading, where you can pause. Once you develop the habit, then you can apply that in real time because your brain is able to move at that pace and you don't need to pause. It is still harder, but it's going to be very hard for you to learn that skill if you start with purely listening to the information. So that would be my first recommendation. Having said that, you can still make it work even if the habit is not fully there yet. And the way that you do that is that you have to, most people when they speak, not every single sentence that they speak is conceptually dense, meaningful information. So as you're listening, you proactively think about how important is this sentence that I'm listening to right now? How important is the point that I'm listening to? You choose to tune out. You use that as the pause to consolidate on the stuff that you previously took down. And you might have a few keywords that you were jotting down as that person was talking. So that's how you would sort of get around it and make a meaningful compromise. But my recommendation is still just start with written text. Oh, another good question. These are good questions, guys. I like these questions. I think these are some of the better questions that I've gotten from these live streams that I've done. I like these. I design good learning systems, but I abandon them within a week when my course load intensifies. How can I make my learning system more sustainable when studying gets demanding? I like to say that there is no better test than reality. When I design a learning strategy or a learning system, or I give someone advice, it has to stand up to reality. It cannot be just based on what the theory says, or what the research says is neuroscientifically better. When you are under stress, under time pressure, feeling a little tired, kind of sleep deprived, learning through like 3-4 different books simultaneously, it has to stand up to that, the challenges of reality. So the benefit of creating a system as opposed to just having a single technique or a single strategy. So the stuff that I taught you, like making prediction errors, that's a method that you can use. That's not a system. A system would be, well, when do you use that? What is the activity that kind of surrounds that? What are you doing before that? What are you doing after that? How does that feed into the notes that you're writing or the schedule that you've created? That's the system. The benefit of having a system is that there are multiple tools working together and there are multiple points of failure. This is a good thing because a system should always adapt to reality. So if you design a system that you think theoretically looks good, but then you apply it and test it against reality and then you realize it's not quite doing it for you, you're running out of time, it's too demanding, whatever it is, that is the truth. Even if you think the system is ideal, it's not if it doesn't give you the result in reality. So that is a feedback point that you need to take and think about, why is it that it is so demanding? Where is the failure point in my system? How can I make this more sustainable? How can I improve that? And that's going to be very personal to your context and your situation. Most people are very capable of making those little adjustments. The issue is that people are not generally expecting to make those adjustments. They have a system and then they apply it, and if it doesn't work, they throw the baby out with the bathwater. Is that Is that what the saying? Throw the baby out with the bathwater? I'm just realizing that that's quite a morbid saying. Anyway, yeah, don't throw the baby out. The system might be fine. The system is your starting point. It's a template. Then apply that to your reality and your context. See what works, see what doesn't, and make those tiny little modifications until you get to something that really you're happy with. And even then, you're gonna have to change that in the future because your situation will continue to evolve. That's what I think is the hallmark of a really effective learner, is that they have a system that they're constantly tweaking and they understand that it's never done. So, okay. This is a bit of a technical question, but I think still a good one because I think a lot of you guys are familiar with some of my other content. The question is, how do I increase my cognitive load tolerance? If you're not familiar with cognitive load tolerance, so it's the amount of mental effort that you're willing to tolerate. This is super important for learning effectively and learning efficiently because every method of effective learning is mentally very active. Your brain is doing a lot of work. If your brain's not doing a lot of work, it is sort of by definition not effective learning. Your brain has to be doing that work for learning to be extracted. Passive learning is when your brain is not doing much. So there's very little cognitive load. Cognitive load tolerance, which is a term that I often use. I don't know if I invented that term. I think I might have actually. But cognitive load tolerance is, from what I see in my coaching, a lot of people will feel these higher levels of mental effort and then they will back away from that. They're very uncomfortable with that load. And that stops them from reaching the really effective levels of learning, right? It's kind of like you're climbing up this mountain and you're getting tired and so you just come back down to camp. It's like, man, if you only just went 100 more meters, you would be above the clouds and you would just see this, the most incredible view. But you have to be able to tolerate that discomfort. So how do you increase that level of tolerance? It's a really good question. The short answer is you kind of can't. What you get better at is managing that cognitive load so that you don't need to tolerate it quite as much. So here's what I mean. A beginner learner, they will consume a bunch of information, get really confused, and then just not know what to do with that confusion. And they will stay confused and they will give up or they will just memorize it because they can't wrap their head around it. So they're just gonna slam it into their brain through brute force. That's not what you should be doing. An intermediate learner, they understand that they have to actively use their brain. They will engage in these active processes, making predictions, making analogies, teaching it to people, using like active retrieval strategies, doing mind mapping. They'll use these methods and then they will feel that they're getting overwhelmed. Because there are so many ways to think about this. There are so many connections I can make. There are so many angles that I could explore this from. There are so many ways I can test myself. And every test that I do, there are new gaps that I find. All of this can feel very overwhelming. When you feel overwhelmed, one way of handling this is to reframe it and say, okay, this overwhelm is my brain trying to figure it out. Let's just be okay with that. Let's just sit there and just keep trying to push through. You can do this. Over time, it will desensitize you to the discomfort of cognitive load. It becomes easier to just maintain that. It doesn't mean that it's effective though. Because when you are in that nearly overloaded, feeling very overwhelmed, what that means is that in your brain, your working memory is nearing capacity. That's what that signal is. When your working memory is almost full, you are going to feel that as overwhelm. It's a very clear indicator. So if you're near the capacity of your working memory and you're near that overwhelm, you don't necessarily want to stay there, because it means that your brain isn't really able to focus all of its resources on figuring it out and finding those patterns and connecting it and building that memory. It's just busy holding on to all the information. So what you want to do is you want to build the habit of detecting that feeling of overwhelm and using that as a signal to change your strategy so that that load comes down to a more manageable level, where you're thinking actively, but now it's not overwhelming. One of the best strategies that I teach all the time, if you've been following my content for any amount of time, you've probably heard me talk about it, is the confusion compass. I love, this is, again, like if I were to give you a third strategy, if there was a third strategy, it would be this. Sorry, I'm real bad at changing screens. The confusion compass. The confusion compass is when you feel confusion, turn it into a question. That's it. Again, super simple method. Instead of saying, I feel confused, say, I feel confused. Why do I feel confused? What is the question that if I had the answer to would make me feel less confused? And all you're going to do is focus your brain in on the actual pieces of information that you need, rather than just staying within the feeling of confusion. The confusion compass is a great strategy because it's triggered by confusion. It's triggered by overwhelm. It's triggered by when your working memory is reaching capacity. So your working memory is reaching capacity, it's not operating as efficiently as it could. That creates the feeling of confusion. You say, okay, what do I need to resolve that confusion and bring that overwhelm down? You turn it into a question, you answer that question. Now you're feeling less overwhelmed and you've managed to stay in that optimal band of cognitive load. This is the ideal loop of what your learning should be looking like. You're constantly taking in more information, thinking about it, getting confused, turning those into targeted questions, answering those questions, becoming less confused, taking in more information, getting confused, asking questions, becoming less confused. You just constantly up and down this confusion, right? So that's really the key to managing the cognitive load, rather than just sort of brute force increasing your tolerance, which again is possible, but is not necessarily effective. Okay, I'm going to take a quick pause here just to read through some of the other comments in the chat before I jump into the next set of questions. How are we feeling about it so far? Guys, give me a little bit of feedback here in the chat. Is what I'm saying making sense to you? Actually, you know what I would love? I would love to know, was there anything in particular that I taught you in this live stream that really stood out to you? Like, was there any particular moment that you were like, wow, that was, if I learned nothing else, just that alone was worth my time being here? I hope there was at least one thing. If there wasn't, I'm really sorry. I'm trying my best here. But please actually let me know in the chat. I really am curious to see what resonated with you guys the most. Oh, there's a quick question here that I see from Celeste Stern, who say that my methods of learning seem to primarily focus on academics. Do they translate across to unrelated domains? Yeah, they do. My methods do not primarily focus on academics. Sometimes I give academic examples because the audience may be more like students, but the most powerful usage of these techniques is just like learning for work or learning for like just life. What I talk about, what I center on is the science of how the brain learns. And learning is anything that your brain does with new information where it needs to then remember and use that information. So as long as it requires new information to be learned and applied in some way, my methods should translate through. I use this for learning like everything. And anything. I generally would consider myself like a fast learner for most things, and that's because I just tap into the science of how the brain works. So yeah, it's completely transferable. Oh, this is not coffee, by the way. This is pu'er tea. So yeah, if I was drinking this much, this is like a liter of coffee. If I drank a liter of coffee, I'd be like bouncing off the walls. Cool. I'm just reading through the comments, guys, just in terms of the feedback that you're providing me. It's really insightful for me. So just give me 30 seconds to read through this, and then I'll move on to the next question. Okay, I think we're transitioning now into like more questions, so I'll answer some of the key ones here. Oh, this is a really good one. Why is it that some people are able to concentrate and focus on something like physical activity like sports, but when it comes to academics or studying, it does not translate? Why is it that some people can't seem to concentrate on learning or cognitive tasks? This is a really good one because it refers to something that's called the default mode network, or the default network of the brain. A while back, I can't actually exactly remember when the study was on this. A while back, a bunch of researchers measured the electrical activity of the brain, and they found that the human brain at rest has this certain not totally dead level of activity. Like it has this certain kind of activity where your brain is quite active and it's doing stuff. And it's doing stuff very globally. Lots of activity just like bouncing around here and there inside the brain. And so because this activity happens at rest, when you're not doing anything, when you're not trying to concentrate or studying or learning or meditating or anything like that, they called it the default network or the default mode network. When you are doing something and you feel your brain is just wandering, you've kind of zoned out and and then you snap back, that is your default mode network kicking in. So the default network is that feeling of your brain kind of just like randomly flittering away doing other things. One of the strongest influences of whether your brain goes to the default mode or not, which would be concentrated, is the active focus that the activity creates. So it's about the activity. In a really simple way of understanding this, your brain gets bored if it's not doing something fun. It's an oversimplified way of explaining this, but it's actually pretty true. A lot of the time when you do physical activity, it's easier for your brain to focus on doing that. I mean, it depends on the physical activity, right? Like you could be, if you're washing dishes, right? You probably, you'd be zoning out if you're, cleaning your room, like wiping a floor or something, like you might just be zoning out. Going for a walk, just like a non-stimulating walk, and you're not listening to anything, you're just walking through nature, your brain might just kind of flitter away, go into the default mode. But if you're doing something like sports that requires concentration and teamwork, and you're observing things, your brain is highly active. It's really focused in on very specific processes that require focus and concentration, and therefore it keeps it locked in away from the default mode. The reason that a lot of people find it hard to maintain concentration when they're doing a cognitive task like studying is because that the process they're using when they're studying is passive. It's a passive process that does not force that focus. So just reading something and not really thinking about it, that's a very passive process. And so the chance that your brain is gonna just slip out of that and enter into the default mode is very high. So the way that you fight that is just by having a more active process. So for example, creating predictions and analogies and teaching it and doing little micro retrieval sessions, thinking about how you can simplify it, mapping it together and comparing it to your prior knowledge. These are very active processes. It requires you to really stop and think and digest the information. Because it requires a higher level of activity and focus, you're more likely to stay locked in and you're less likely to get distracted. So the trick to concentration is not like build concentration so that you can do this thing. It is do the thing which creates the concentration. It's the other way around. Good question, that one, I think. Because it's such a well understood thing inside cognitive science and neuroscience, but I find it most people don't realize this in kind of like mainstream. I don't see a lot of people talking about this. I think probably now that I've said it, a bunch of people are going to start talking about this. That's usually what happens. This is an interesting one. So someone asked me before in terms of like how transferable the stuff that I'm teaching is to other things, right? So I think this is a good question to reflect that. The question is saying, well, there's actually a couple questions here, but I kind of summarize it as, what is the most effective method for reflecting so that you can improve a skill quickly? How do you properly reflect on attempts to learn skills more quickly? This is really tied into the idea of creating prediction errors. You cannot just reflect your way to success. Reflection is not automatically beneficial for upskilling. Reflection is just mining some data, creating patterns, creating meaning from an experience. Obviously, if you don't do enough practice, you don't have enough data, so there's nothing for you to reflect on, so you're not going to improve. Likewise, if you just reflect and reflect and reflect and reflect, you don't have enough mental bandwidth to be able to extract like every possible piece of learning from the experience that you've had. You need to be iterating on this. And the way that you iterate on it is you make sure that the experience is you acting out a prediction and getting feedback on that. And then all you're going to do is think, what is the error or correctness of my prediction? So I think that if I kick the ball in this way, man, I'm noticing that every time I kick the ball, it veers to the left of wherever I was aiming towards. Okay, maybe this time I'm gonna look at my foot. I'm gonna look at the position of my foot and my ankle when I kick the ball to see if I can figure that out. Okay, I'm gonna do that. I reflect on that. I realize that, okay, maybe if I angle my foot slightly towards the right, it's gonna prevent that. So let me try angling my foot slightly to the right, aiming at the same spot and seeing if it fixes it. Okay, it didn't help. I'm still kicking it to the right. So that's a prediction error. So that error, you find the error by reflecting on the experience. But the error is only as valuable as the prediction that was created before that. Because when the error comes through, when you get feedback, that feedback needs something to correct. If there isn't something to change, your brain doesn't know what to do with that. This is the reason why you can produce this piece of work and you give it to someone and they give you feedback on it and they say, oh, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. You're like, I just don't really know how to be any better. Like, I did my best. it's not good enough. You're saying it's not good enough, but I don't know what I need to change. That is the situation where you have feedback, but your brain doesn't know where to put that feedback. There's no context for it. So you need to make sure that every error is tied to that prediction. You have to have the prediction that if I do it in this way, it will lead to this outcome. Okay, I tried it, I was wrong. Therefore, something about my prediction needs to change. And then you run multiple iterations. Well, maybe this needs to change. Nope. Maybe it was this thing. Nope. Maybe it was this thing. Oh, something is different now. Maybe I'll pursue that. You double down on that. And you continue to iterate in this way until you get more and more detailed in your understanding about what really needs to change to get the result that you're looking for. So the most effective way to reflect, it's less about the reflection technique and it's more about, are you in a position for your reflection to be meaningful? And that's about whether you have that prediction up front. On the point of reflection technique though, if I were to bring it down to one thing that I see most people skip out on or they underestimate, which I think is probably the most important part of reflecting in terms of making you upskill faster, is what we call the abstraction. It's what is the underlying tendency, the habit, the trend that doesn't just apply to this context and this example and this experience, but probably you're repeating in every other experience. You're probably doing this in other domains of your life as well without you realizing it. What's the underlying trend behind why this thing happened? That is usually where you're going to get the most bang for buck. That's usually the change that you need to make. And then that becomes your prediction. I predict that if I make this change, this will be better in all these different ways. It's more transferable. And then you try it and you see whether your prediction was right or wrong. That forms a prediction error, which is a signal that creates feedback and growth. So you can see why, when I talked about this stuff before, like creating prediction errors, you can see why I said like this is such a high yield set of techniques, because like these things apply for any kind of learning. It's just, you can just apply it in so many different ways. It's this entire perspective of thinking about upskilling and learning that gets unlocked when you realize the value of making prediction errors. Okay. Next question. By the way, guys, is the stream okay for you guys? Is it working? Is it still pretty smooth? It's a little laggy sometimes on my side, so I'm just checking that it's all okay for you guys. Let me know if there's an issue. Yes, and the app that I'm using right now is Ahmni, A-H-M-N-I. It was actually developed by one of our own students. They learned the techniques. They realized there's no app that really serves this function, because I'm always talking about it. They built one for this type of note-taking. I've been testing it now for like almost a year. I test things a lot before I like to recommend them, but I'm at a point now where I think it's actually pretty good. So I do recommend that if you're looking for a good solution. I think it's only on iOS at the moment, but if you're looking for a good solution, then Ahmni is pretty good. There is another app which I used to use a lot, which is called Concepts, for those of you that are interested. I would say that Concepts is still the best on the market in terms of pure, just like app quality, like the build and the feature set and just it's like the way it's designed and everything. Like I think Concepts is still the best out there, but it's also like way more expensive. And I mean, it's also like, I just think like no one probably cares about those features other than me. So for most people, I think Ahmni is going to be a great solution. Okay, just going through to see if there's any other questions that are quite different that I haven't covered. Was there any part of the explanation on any of the stuff that I've talked about so far that you felt particularly lost on, that you want me to sort of recap on, or you didn't quite understand? If there's a particular thing that a lot of you guys were confused on, then I'll try and re-explain that as well. Most of the questions that I'm seeing so far, I feel like I've already answered them. They just worded in slightly different ways. Oh, here's a little quick question. Is like, what happens if you get a prediction error? Like, what happens if your prediction is actually correct, so you don't get a prediction error? That's fine as well. But you're making so many predictions all the time that you're gonna get you'll get some right, you'll get some wrong. When you get it right, it's also good. Like, you're getting a lot of benefit from the fact you made the prediction anyway, because it's still like a really active use of your brain. But you're just not getting the, oh yeah, that's why I was wrong. You're gonna get instead that, oh okay, so I was actually right. It's still gonna be good for your brain. But in the grand scheme of things, like, it doesn't matter whether you were right or wrong. This is a super broad question, but I want to answer it just because I jump at any time that I can to give clarity and just like hammer this particular point home. The question is, if I could give one piece of advice on learning, what would that be? If I had one opportunity to talk to one person one time for the rest of their life, and I knew that I could communicate nothing else to them until the day that they die, and I wanted to give them the one advice that I think could be the most life-changing, it would be, do not try to make learning feel easy. Make learning effective. Things are easy when you are good at doing things. The problem that most people have, like, learning is no different from any other skill. When you are first learning a skill, it's not about efficiency or how fast you're able to do anything. It's just, can you do it well? You're just trying to be good at it. When you're first learning to play tennis, you just have to learn how to do each thing in the right way. That's the most important part. The difficulty of learning is getting good. When you get good and you practice that 100 times, 1,000 times, it gets fast. And that thing that everyone else finds difficult, that you used to find difficult, now it's easy. That's what it means for learning to be easy, is that you are good at hard things. Being good at learning is not about doing easy things. That's like a long piece of advice, but if that was the only thing I could say to someone, that will be it. Because if you do not understand that, then you will actually make changes to the way you learn that make you worse, because you think ease is the goal. And often ease is the opposite direction from the goal. All the results, the outcomes, the good things in life that you want, they come from being good at doing the hard thing. There's a question from quite a while ago, actually, around whether I've been learning any instruments and whether my strategies and methods on upskilling applies to that as well. So I don't know if you guys know, but I kind of don't anymore, but I used to dance quite a bit. Did you guys know that? It's actually funny because there was this, I think it was like a reel or maybe it was in a YouTube video where there was like a clip of me dancing from like years ago, and someone was like, "Oh, this is AI," and I was like so flattered. I was like, "Really? You think it could have been AI? Like, man, that's great. That's so nice to read." But yeah, anyway, I used to do a lot of dancing. I used to do a particular style of freestyle dance called popping, and I just like haven't really been dancing anymore. Just hobbies change, I guess, right? But I used to apply all these strategies for like learning to dance as well. Like I would have a prediction. I actually used to use this whiteboard right here. I would have a prediction about how I can be better at a certain thing that I was focusing on in my dance. Like there might be a particular move that I did and I'm like, something about this feels weird. It looks kind of weird. I'm not exactly sure why. Like maybe it's the timing between my feet and my head. So then I'll write on the board, I'd be like, try to change this timing in this way. And I'd have that as like a little experiment. Then I would dance for like a few minutes. I'd record myself trying to think about that, and then I'd watch the recording and see whether that was right or wrong. I'd be like, nope, still looks like crap. New prediction. Okay, maybe it's this thing, maybe it's this thing. So I used to do that for dance. I do that for most of the skills that I'm actively trying to improve. I haven't been learning an instrument recently, at least. So I haven't really applied it for then. I haven't learned an instrument in like over 10 years. And back then I didn't know anything about learning. So I haven't applied for instruments, but a lot of my students and clients have applied it, and they are musicians, and they say that it works fine. In fact, a lot of the research is done on music and musicians as well, which is kind of cool. No, could be my favorite question of all. Do I prefer Final Fantasy 7 or 9? 7. I actually recently started playing 9 just to see if I would like it, and I just got so bored I actually stopped. I think that might be like sacrilegious to say for those of you that are fans, but I just could not. You guys probably don't even know, but like for in the background of my YouTube videos, like right there, that's like a steel case album cover. Wait, where is it? Yeah, it's like a steel album cover kind of thing of the Final Fantasy 7 game. It's been sitting there on my shelf since like the first YouTube videos I did in this office. Okay, we are coming up to sort of the end of the live stream. I probably will try to answer one more quick question, but before I get onto that, I would be keen to hear, did you guys like this live stream? How did you find it? Did the live stream give you anything that you don't normally get in a YouTube video? If you've been following me for a while, like I've only done maybe 3 or 4 live streams in the last 5 years. I do not do these often at all, but I'm thinking maybe I will do more of these. And I'm not sure yet. If you guys really like it, then I will try to work it into the flow a little bit more. But I really need to know, like, what is it about the live stream that you find good? Or if you were like, honestly, kind of would rather just prefer like a normal video, didn't really feel anything valuable from the live stream, then let me know as well. Because that's like good data for me. I don't want to be like doing this thing that, you know, like 40 people really enjoy and like 10,000 people absolutely hate. Because, you know, so yeah, let me know. I would love to get your feedback on that. And as you are commenting on that, I'm just going to have a quick flick through to see if there's one final question for me to answer before we wrap up the stream. Okay, I think the final question that I'll answer is I've been seeing some questions that are around it. By the way, thank you all for those of you that were leaving your feedback. I had a read through that. Like me and the team will also go through that later and think about whether we're going to do more live streams. So if you haven't left your feedback yet and you want to let me know, please leave the comment. The last question I think I'll answer is around what is the best way to learn more procedurally heavy topics like coding, like maths, things that have sort of defined steps that you need to go through and you need to do those steps really accurately. Most people who struggle with a procedurally heavy topic, they don't struggle with the procedural part. This is, I think, the biggest misconception that creates the biggest breakthrough for most people. Just because something is procedurally heavy and requires a certain fixed procedure doesn't mean that that's the failure point or the hardest part. For example, most people learn physics and maths, especially maths, very procedurally. They start with, this is the step, this is the formula, here is the equation, this is the order in which you need to do this. Do it again and again and again and again and again. And then when they actually have to apply that knowledge and context, they're giving some kind of some scenario, and then they have to apply these formulas into that. They don't know how to use that knowledge because it's not really there in a conceptual way. I can't remember exactly who said this. There's this mathematics professor who said that if you want to get good at maths, learn it in words first. And I fully agree with this. And I see this is such a common theme in my coaching practice, is that people who really struggle with a procedurally heavy topic, they often are struggling with the conceptual part of that procedural topic. They often haven't spent much time understanding the underlying concepts behind why the equations or the formulas or the structures or the functions are the way that they are. They haven't established that fundamental logic. So when they try to go and apply the knowledge, there is nothing to really draw on. It's kind of like a random, does this fit? Does this fit? Does this fit? This is also the reason why a lot of people make silly mistakes and maybe they get the units wrong. It's like, well, it doesn't make sense to use this equation because just because there's an F here and there's an F here, it doesn't mean that those two are the same F. Like these are talking about completely different concepts. This is a capital F, this is a lowercase f, like these types of things. And I found the most success not in helping people just get better at procedural things, because procedural things you just get better at if you just do practice. So if you're already doing practice and putting in some repetition, but you're not getting better at the procedural things, there is a chance that there's a very advanced type of procedural aspect to it that you need to practice in a different way. That is also possible. However, more likely, like overwhelmingly more likely, is that you're being held back by your ability to know how to apply the knowledge. And knowing how to apply knowledge is conceptual. Procedural, just really quickly, one thing to clarify. Most people also misunderstand what procedural knowledge is. Procedural knowledge is most similar to muscle memory. Knowing how to apply steps is not procedural. Being able to apply steps correctly is also not necessarily procedural. Procedural is almost to the point of it being automatic. That's what procedural is. So if you are able to do something procedurally, but only when you're trying to do it fast, do you introduce errors, then yes, that could be an issue with your procedural practice, and you need to practice that under time pressure and things like that to get better at it. But if that's not the issue, and you just don't know how to apply your knowledge and get better at it, all of that is actually conceptual. And so the strategies that I've been teaching you, they apply directly, exactly for those topics as well. The biggest difference is that you're just not used to thinking about it in that way. So sometimes you don't know that the topic could even be thought about in that way. Trust me, it can. And if you just say, yes, I can learn it in this way, and you try and approach it from a more conceptual angle, applying the techniques that I've taught, you will find that you're seeing this topic in a completely different light. And all those procedural things just naturally become a lot easier. So I think that's probably the final thing that we'll end on. Like I said, these were some really great questions. we are on time here. Thanks everyone for leaving your feedback. I'll make sure to go through and read through the chat after this as well. But otherwise, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your morning, afternoon, night, whatever time it is for you. And I will see you in either the next video or the next live session. Thanks everyone. Hope you have a good one.